in appliances. It is a fourth generation company. It's almost 100 years, approaching a century. 81, so 81 years old. They've been a major player in the appliance industry here in this region. And I've worked with Matthew, who's a graduate from Georgia Tech. You're really going to like this because Matthew's going to give it to you straight. I know some of my language is sometimes colorful, and so I think everything's on the table, and after his initial presentation, I'm really hoping that you're going to have a good Q&A. So for this class, I will not be taking hard copies today. I want you to take notes. There is a Dropbox in Moodle. I'm looking for at least one page on the key learnings and the key aspects of Mr. Brown's lecture today. Is that okay? And so you may want to introduce yourself a little bit more, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, and once again, we're so happy to have you today.
Glad to be here. Matthew Brown. Brown Stoveworks is located about 4 blocks east of this building. So if you ever head that direction, you'll run right into us. My great-grandfather started it in 1935, and I am now the 4th generation to run the business. It's a small family private business, so we are competing globally against, I guess you would say, the GEs of the world, the Frigidairs of the world, the Whirlpools of the world, but also Samsung, Haier, Bosch, Thermador. We've got our hands full trying to keep up with those guys because we're a whole lot smaller than they are. The guy asked me to talk to you today. I thought I'd give you a little history of the company, a little history on me, and then get right into here's what it's like. I've sat right where y'all are, so I know what you're thinking. Hey, what's this guy going to do that's going to apply to my life? Well, there's a lot of fun stories. I probably can't tell all of them, but it's pretty fun to deal with international businesses. Brown Stoveworks, like I said, started in 1935, built gas ranges and coal and wood heaters. Over the years, we've added electric ranges, built-in appliances. We've produced for everybody in the industry produces for everybody else. So we've produced for Whirlpool, GE, Frigidaire over the years, and Viking. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viking ranges. We made those from 1985 to 1991. And in 1991, we started our own high-end professional stainless line called 5 Star. So please Google it and buy one if you can. I'll give you a 5% discount. In the 90s, when I graduated, I went to Georgia Tech undergrad, and then went and started work. I graduated on a Saturday, started work on a Monday. Realized, wait, I'm 25 years younger than everybody else in the management here, and kind of like y'all, you probably look at Guy and go, he's old, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The world's changed. Well, that's what I was facing. My father and his generation were in there, and they really were old school. So I said, I got to go get an MBA. This is crazy. So I went to UTC and got an MBA. Didn't apply it at all during the 90s. We were so busy making ranges for other people that I never really took advantage of what I learned. And now, 15, 20 years after that, business has changed, and I'm really having to use what I learned during business school and MBA. It's a whole lot harder now, and Guy's been helping us do a lean implementation. So that's been fun. But in the 90s, there was no foreign competition in the appliance industry. You had, the big boys, GE, Whirlpool, and Frigidaire, and us. That was it. And there was one small Italian company that would bring in some small appliances, but they were no threat whatsoever. As the 90s closed out, some of the bigger, everybody started locating plants in Mexico. When they started doing that, all the suppliers started going to Mexico. So that was really my first introduction to international business. I had to go to Mexico to meet with suppliers. And if anybody had been to El Paso, Juarez is right on the opposite side of El Paso. And when you cross that border, it is a different world. It's a totally different world. And everybody moved there because, of course, the labor was cheap. But at the time, I felt like when I started going there in the mid-90s, it was disorganized, it was dirty. It was just cheap labor. That was the only reason people were there. By the time I, stopped going there in the early 2000s, it was obvious that big business had come in and put in state-of-the-art facilities, and it was something that I was like, wow, I wish we looked that good. That was my first introduction to, wait, America is not the best. Other people can do it better than us. In the mid-2000s, we had the opportunity, I was at a trade show, and Samsung walks up to us and says, hey, we'd like you to make some ranges for us. And I'm like, sure, we'll be happy to do that. And I showed him what we had, and he said, no. We want to make a brand new product that's going to compete on the high-end scale with GE Cafe, Electrolux Icon, and Whirlpool Gold, that class of product. So a range that would cost $1,500 to $2,000 retail. And it had to be a gas self-clean. We didn't make a gas self-clean at the time, but like any American guy, you could say, yeah, we can do that. So with our limited staff, we met with, felt like half of Korea. I'm serious. They walked in, they had more people than we did. And it was at our place. And, we're in our conference room, and I'm looking around going, I'm in trouble. These guys, I've got the president of the Samsung appliance division, 2 or 3 of their top R&D guys. And I realized, it's just me and our sales guy and our plant manager and our engineer. I'm like, we are in trouble. As we started negotiating the contract, they asked me to fly to Chicago, where they had their U.S. headquarters. And how honest can I be here?
We need to be as honest.
So the way the Koreans do business, their entire goal is to win the mental warfare. So when you're negotiating a contract, they're going to have a team of guys over here that are going to take you out, and they're going to keep you out late. And then they're going to have another team over here that's ready to go at 8 in the morning. So when there's only 1 or 2 of you, meaning me and another guy, we're out all night negotiating 8 in the morning. It's tough. So that was my first lesson in how to learn to say no. And it's in their culture, it's disrespectful to not participate in the social side, because they feel that's how they close the deal. They want to build a trust with you. So you have to participate, but you got to say, okay, time to go home, guys. Wanted to back up for a second. I guess another international, that was a mistake on my part. One thing I did right in another international venture, I was trying to sell ranges to Haier, which is the world's largest appliance manufacturer, HAIER. You've probably never heard of them, but they make probably every microwave that Samsung doesn't make, Haier makes it. They're a very large company in China, out of Qingdao, China. And their U.S. headquarters is in New York, so I fly up there. And on the plane, I Googled, I didn't even know anything about Haier. I Googled them, ordered a book, and it was the Haier way. Read the book on the plane up there, met with their president, who happened to be Jewish. And when I didn't realize at the time, he was asking me what I knew about Haier, and I started spouting off just every statistic in the book. And he was pretty impressed with that. And we got to talking more, and his business plan was going to overlap with one of our distributors in New York, he's run by a Jewish guy. And I said, hey, we cannot, I can't do this deal this way. Let's restructure it. And when I explained to him why, I think that's why I closed the deal. Because he realized I was going to take care of my existing customers, and they had a relationship that I didn't know they had. So they ended up ordering thousands of ranges from us, probably because of me reading the book and honoring my commitment to a current customer. So people, that's important. Back to Samsung. So we negotiated a contract, and it always starts out with an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And you just broad general outlines of what's going to happen. And that's easy to agree to, okay, because you're trying to make the deal. We're trying to make this deal happen. Yeah, I think we can agree to that. Well, then they dump a 2-inch contract on the table for you to sign after you've kind of agreed to, in principle, some of the things. And they have to leave real quickly. We need to get this signed right now. And I'm like, I'm not going to sign this. So that was a smart move on my part. But they were trying to get me to sign this 2-inch thick contract based off of a very generic understanding agreement. So they will try to push you around a little bit. When we finally got all the details ironed out, which, by the way, if you're ever reading a contract, and this goes with any contract, but especially dealing with someone outside the States, make sure you read every single clause, because when we would go through the contract, you would have Article 8.1 through 15, and you're reading it, you're kind of getting the gist of it. You're like, yeah, I agree. And then there's that one little thing, C document Appendix 14. Well, when you see Appendix 14, it's a quality document that thick. So you got to go read that because you're agreeing to all the terms in that quality contract. It's very detailed, and when you're a small business, it's tough. I mean, I could have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with lawyers going through this, or just stay up late at night and do it myself. Probably, in the end, I don't know. Might have been better if I'd spent a few $1,000s with a lawyer, but nonetheless, we got through that part. We started going through the R&D portion of building products in our plant, and they want to do a DV, which is a design validation. So you have to soft tool parts. And as you're going through this is something we've never done before. We've had the same chassis for many years. We've made modifications, but we've never had to, from the ground up, build a brand new product line. And this was the first red flag with these guys. The design validation did not go as well as what they hoped. And they sent probably 30 people over here. And they're hanging out in our office for the next 6 months, making sure we were able to meet their schedule. That was an interesting, that was a pretty interesting time. We set up offices for all these guys. Nicest guys you'll ever meet, by the way. That's one thing I will say. Dealing with the Koreans, every one of them was polite, very, very intelligent, hardworking. So no complaints on that side. But as they told us, Korea, they got a fresh start in 1950. After the Korean War, half their country was just dirt. So when they started rebuilding it, all their factories are fairly new, with the most modern technology. And the way they do their vetting system for their engineers is totally different than here. They start, and I think this is this way in China as well. They start calling people out, 6th grade, 8th grade. If you're not passing certain tests, you're going to be working on a farm. And they call people out pretty quickly. And of course, everybody wants to be an engineer because that's where they make the most money. So the guys we were dealing with were highly motivated, very intelligent people that made less than a lot of engineers we have. They're far more qualified than what we had. So that's an advantage that we ran into, or that Asian companies have over us. They have much more skilled labor at much less cost. That we ran into that in a couple of different scenarios. Tool and die, when you're having to tool up, everyone here familiar with tooling presses. When you have to tool up a project, it's several $1 million. And China, of course, is the cheapest place to get it done. And when I went over to China, I'm, walking through their factories and looking at, this guy right here, he knows an awful lot about tool and die. What does he make? And it's $2,500. I mean, that's a $75,000 a year position in America, in the States. And they've got a room full of them. I mean, and I was telling Guy before we got in here, he said y'all had a few conferences with Chinese people and Australians. Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about intellectual property. Yes, if you send it to China, it will be taken from you. I walked in, and SolidWorks is the design software we use. I walked in, and they had a room twice this size with engineers in it, using every type of. They said, "What software do you use?" I said, "SolidWorks." And they said, "Oh yes, we've got a copy of that." And they had 20 copies of it. That's a $10,000 software license that they're not paying anything on. So when you sit there and think about the advantages that are built in, the inherent advantages that are built into most of these Asian companies through cheap labor that's highly motivated and highly educated. That's tough to overcome. The same, the comparable scale in America it's factors of 10 on some of the jobs that people can do. Back to the contracts. We started going through this process, and this is probably one of the most interesting things. We realized with their 30 people here, they changed the design of the range, added cost to the range, and I had to call them up and say, hey guys, we got to talk. The price I gave you is not going to be good. We've added this, and this. And that went to my main contact. Well, I got a call from, I guess, their division president. I was at home because everything's, I don't remember, 12 hours different, 10 to 12 hours different. I remember sitting on my back porch and I got a phone call and I'm like, and this guy says, you must come to Korea. And I'm like, I really don't want to come to Korea. He said, you will come to Korea. And I said, okay. And we're talking millions of dollars worth of business. I'm going to fly to Korea. And our plant manager flew to Korea. I think I should have realized that it was April Fool's Day when we went, and that would have probably been a harbinger for what was to come. We flew in, landed in, I forgot the name of the airport, but went into Seoul. They had made arrangements. We had a car, Hyundai, and everything. Everything there is Hyundai, LG, Samsung, Daewoo, or Kia. When you're driving through their interstate, every building is owned by Samsung, Hyundai. They're in the real estate business. And these are not corporations like you would think of here. These are monolithic giants. And I'm sure there's other companies, but those are the 5 I saw on every building, high-rise building I saw. They owned all the real estate. I'm sure they had all the appliances in there, and they supplied the cars for the people to drive. So it's a totally different culture. We get there. They're real nice the first day. They ordered pizza for us. We're in a conference room in their headquarters. Had pizza for us, and I'm like, okay, this ain't gonna be too bad. I was wrong. They immediately turned the lights off, turned the PowerPoint on. Which, by the way, these guys love PowerPoint. I've never seen anything like it. They can throw together a PowerPoint faster than you can think the thought. They overwhelm with PowerPoints. So they said, we've done steel. We've done steel pricing across the world. Here's what the price of steel is, because that was one of my excuses for raising the prices. Steel's going up. They proved that it hadn't, and then then it was cardboard, then it was electrical, and they went through everything. And what they failed to understand is that may be true for the industry as a whole, but our buying power doesn't enable us to take advantage of buying straight from the mill. We have to go through a slitter. So we don't get those, and trying to get that communicated to, well, you should be able to do that. I'm like, well, we can't. We don't have the volume. We're not making 3 million ranges over there a year, and it's getting that communicated was difficult. And then they started the social hour. Well, then we'll put you in the car and we're going to go to this restaurant. And I forgot what it was. It's not soju, but they've got rice wine, and they love that stuff. So you're at a Korean barbecue, and somebody says something, hey, I think we can work this out. Well, you must drink this. And I'm like, all right. So we're going through this. Next thing I know, it's midnight, and I'm like, I've got another negotiation at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I fell into the same trap again. So they take us to our hotel, and sure enough, we come back, and they bring in, and I forgot what this guy, he had to be 150 years old. This guy, and he came walking in like this, and everybody was they're very hierarchical there. And the head dudes, the president of the division is sitting next to me, and he is, very quiet, head down. When this old guy walks in, he shuffles over to me. I'm like, this isn't going to go well, And he introduced himself, and I think he was the retired chair of Samsung. He was the man, and he wanted to talk to me. He pulled me aside and basically said, "You need to drop your price to make this deal happen." And he's trying to be grandfatherly to me. That didn't work. And I said, no, can't do it. And, they started getting very upset. And anybody here, who here is from outside of the States? Anybody here? Okay. Imagine just you being in a room with a whole bunch of, Americans, and it's just you, and they're trying to force their opinion on you. It's intimidating, isn't it? I mean, it happens to you a lot here, I'm sure. I mean, it's intimidating. Well, now imagine there's only one, you may not get back home. You're willing to agree to anything just to get home. Plus, you got a headache. You're like, it's been a long night. I want to go home. So you start agreeing to things that you normally would not agree to. But that's how it works. When you're that happens in America too. I mean, it's the same. But that is a situation that you will find yourself in when you're negotiating with, particularly Asians. As I said, the social side of it is very important to the business aspect. So we got that worked out. They came back. We ended up not doing the deal with them. We went through this for 2 years, and in the end, we kind of both agreed not to go forward. Probably the best for everyone concerned. And I learned a lot from all aspects, the contract side, the manufacturing side, the quality side, and, guy kind of laughs. And they would say, you must water clean. And I'm like, what is water clean? They wanted us to mop the floor every day. And I'm like, this is crazy. And now we're mopping the floor every day, 5 years later because of the guy. No, the lean manufacturing. And once you start getting into the lean manufacturing aspect of things, you start realizing all the points they were trying to make and how valid they really were. But, to a small town, American business that's not been exposed to that, you ignore it and say, no, this will work. We've always done it this way. And an outsider telling you what to do with your business is tough to swallow, especially when you've been fairly successful. It takes getting your teeth kicked in a little bit before you're willing to change. And so that's why in the last few years we've kind of made a change in the way we're doing business. I've got a ton of stories I can tell, but I know if anybody has any questions, I can tell you about other companies. I can tell you about being in China, Thailand, Korea. I can tell you about being in factories all over there and tell you what it's like to have, like I said, it felt like half of Korea sitting in your plant. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer some. Yeah.
Do you have any funny culture stories as far as cues maybe you missed while you're over there about maybe things that are supposed to be respected? I don't know.
Well, I'm a reader. So before I started dealing with these guys, I ordered a book on Amazon on Korean business culture. And they are very, this. And when you do a business card, I don't have a business card, but if I was giving you a business card, in America, you say, here you go. But if you're giving them a business card, get this to me real fast. You take it like this and you act like they just gave you the greatest gift in the world. Thank you. And you don't put it in your pocket, or don't put it in your, you don't just shove it in your pocket the way normal business people would. You put it in front of you like this, and I always lined it up so you're, Mr. Wong and Mr. Hong. They all had, and that's what their names were. Mr. Wong, Mr. Hong. I got upset. I probably shouldn't tell this, but I did get upset with Nick Wong. Nick Wong. They all had, they have an American name, and he was changing something, and I got pretty chapped. And I may have said something I shouldn't have and kicked the part. And, it happens. When you're in a stressful situation, you lose your cool. And the room got quiet. And all the Koreans looked at me. And this guy named Brian, who was my main contact, I could tell I'd done something very wrong. And he pulled me aside afterwards. I said, well, what's the big deal? He says, in Korea, you do not use that language ever. That is most disrespectful. And I went, well, too late now. You'll have to get over it. And I smoothed it over. But, you do lose your cool. But it's hard that was probably the biggest thing I had trouble with, is the constant pressure every day of someone telling you, you got to change this, you got to change this, we need this faster, when are you going to have it done? And realizing every time they open their mouth, that's adding cost to the problem. And the slower you are, the farther away, you're investing all this money and you're banking on the return over here. And every time they change something, the project gets delayed, so your return is delayed. And every time they add cost, your margin shrinks. It'll add, and you start getting a little, I got antsy. I have to admit, I got antsy. Any other questions or any other culture questions? Or?
How about entertaining? Did most of them smoke?
About half of them.
About half of them?
The younger ones didn't.
Oh. Okay.
The younger ones did not. But the older ones, when I say older, 40-year-old, at the time I was 40, so they were young. But yeah, and we've got a smoking area, and they were respectful. They would go to our smoking area. The funniest thing was they stayed out at across from Cleveland Community Hospital, the Fairfield Inn. It was a brand new hotel at the time, and they only ate at McDonald's. They're very brand conscious. If they haven't heard of it, they won't go there. I mean, so they knew McDonald's, and McDonald's is fairly close. And the guy named Brian, who I became good friends with, still Facebook friends with. I don't go on Facebook, but I got a little notice Brian wants to be Facebook. I said, he sued me. Why do you want to be my friend? But he's a nice guy. Anyhow, Brian, he said, is there any place else to eat in Cleveland besides McDonald's? And I said, yeah, there's tons of restaurants. After the first few days, you cannot babysit these guys. They rented their own cars and they did their own thing. But I found out what they really wanted was Korean food. So they would go down to Chattanooga. There was a Korean restaurant run by a Greek guy in one of the strip malls down there. And then they went to Rain. Have you all ever been to Rain for Thai food? I love Thai food. And they would go there a lot. And then they would ship in their own stuff in care packages, because I remember they'd use our address, and I'd take them a little care package, and their eyes would light up, because Brian lived over here for 6 months at a time, and then he would have to go back and renew his visa and come back. And they rotated. There was a Brian and somebody else, I can't remember his name. They would, every 6 months they would rotate. But I took them to ball games, my kids' ball games, and we went to the lake. It's fun. It was great to get to understand their culture. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And by the way, anybody who is not taking advantage of the international students you have at Lee, you're making a huge mistake. My son goes to Baylor, and he lives in the dorm there, and I'm like, Grover, you need to get to know these international students. And he won't do it. He's 16. He's not. But you guys need to get to know the international students, because you could learn so much from them. And think how brave it is for them to come over here and go to school in a different culture. So that would be a recommendation I would make. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Any question? You talk about those care packages.
Yes.
So one thing that just, you talk about culture, and they would ship in the dried squid. At least when I worked with the Japanese, and they'd pop these things like chewing gum. And have you ever smelled rotting fish?
Yeah.
Well, that's what.
My friend owns that hotel, and he said, "Hey, Brown, you're killing me, man."
Man.
And I'm like, well, it smells like money to me. I don't know. But it was, yeah. They and we made kimchi. I don't know if you've ever had kimchi. If you ever have a chance to go to a real Korean restaurant, Korean barbecue, and get the kimchi, incredible. Well, I wanted to make kimchi for them, and so my wife and I, we were going through our cooking phase. You go through phases, During that period, we're like, we'll try kimchi, but we made Tennessee kimchi, and they loved it. They thought it was good. We made Korean barbecue, but it was Tennessee Korean barbecue, so we had our own little flair to it. It was good, but they really appreciated it. I'll tell you one other story. All right, so I'm in